All right. Hello, everybody, respected professionals, Senior Leader, Dr. Juan Carlos Fernandez, Keynote Speaker, Professor Amreshwar Gala, presenters, Dr. Lamia Ferzi, Dr. Hugo Carly Forrest, Dr. Jangir Hussain, Dr. Gayatri Mathur, Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya, Ms. Madiha Ahmad Khan, and all our valued attendees. Greetings to you all. Well, if you don't mind, may I put on the microphone, like, may I turn off the microphones of everybody? All right, sorry for that. Well, today is Saturday, May 7th, 2022. You are currently attending International Virtual Conference on Museums, IVCOM. So we are in the Group 8, Latin America, and this session is dedicated to Ecuador. The conference theme is the future of museums, recover and reimagine, and subfields are related to museum cultural heritage, art, and education. So on behalf of ICOM Ecuador and ICOM Family Forum, it's an honor to welcome you all to the International Virtual Conference on Museums, IVCOM. My name is Mina Lama, and I'll be the moderator for this session. I'm a member of ICOM Nepal. If you have any questions, please do let us know, and you can use the chat box to write the questions for us. Well, before we begin, I would like to request all the attendees to mute their microphones. Thank you very much. It's already muted. And well, today's session is actually being recorded, and the link will be made accessible in our group chat shortly after we finish our session. If you have any questions for the presenters, please use the chat features to submit your questions. Due to time limitations, we won't be taking questions in person. Sorry for that. Well, each presenters will have a total of 20 minutes for their presentation. And with this brief request, I would like to invite our honorable keynote speaker of today's session, Professor Dr. Amreshwar Gala from India. Well, he is the faculty of Emirates at the University of Canberra and professor at the Anand National University, Ahmedabad, India. Well, without further delay, let us welcome Dr. Professor Amreshwar. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Meena. Thank you very much. By the way, Emeritus faculty at Australian National University in Canberra, because there are 4 universities there.
Oh, right.
I'm from India, but I'm actually an Australian, so I'm also Australian. And wonderful to see you all. And Mohammed Bhaiya, Javed Bhaiya, you're doing a great job. And I tell you why this is such a pleasure for me to follow the IVCOM. When I was the vice president of ICOM, and Dr. Hans Martin Hinz and myself, we really pushed very hard for inter-regional alliance engagement. That means getting ICOM Europe and AFRICOM together, ICOM Asia Pacific and others together, saying that most of these groupings are, post World War II groupings, have a certain amount of Orientalism about them, and that we should engage across this. But I think that IVCOM is doing it much better than we could have ever done, thanks to technology, but also the leadership of Javed Bhaiya. And Juan Carlos, this is very significant that ICOM Ecuador, I mentioned Lucia Astudillo. When Lucia was the president of ICOM Ecuador, way back in 1992, how many years ago was that? 30 years ago? In Quebec City at ICOM Triennial General Assembly, the question was raised, is ICOM, Western European? Is it European? Is it very Eurocentric? And the consensus from the ICOM Advisory Council was that it was, and that that something needs to be done about it. So that's how the working group on cross-cultural issues was formed. And I wasn't even there, I was out partying and dancing away with all my Latin American friends, which is what we did in ICOM those days. And then I was told, Amma, you've just been appointed as the chair of this working group. And so we met all over the world, and Lucia was an active member of the group. and from ICOM Ecuador. So please give my regards. And then it translated under Alexandra Cummins when she was president of ICOM into the cross-cultural task force, which came up with ICOM Cultural Diversity Charter, which should be somewhere on the ICOM webpage. Otherwise, you look up onmuseums.com. You can access it over there. It was adopted with by the entire General Assembly, with the exception of 7 people, and it was one of the largest ICOM General Assemblies in Shanghai that adopted it. And why there were exceptions was interesting. They said that if something is unanimous, then something is not working in ICOM. To show that it's still democratic, 7 abstained deliberately, so which I think was wonderful. So I just wanted to share that little bit with Juan Carlos and Javed Bhaiya, because I think that I've been with ICOM for such a long time. One of the things that I found in Kyoto with the fiasco about the definition of ICOM, the museum definition, is that there is cultural amnesia. Like in all organizations, ICOM is not unique. There's a lot of work that's been done, but it's often forgotten, lost on the ICOM webpage. I mean, I challenge you to find the ICOM Cultural Diversity Charter, which informs so many transformations. And so I thought I would recall a couple of things so that you know that it's a trajectory, the evolution of ICOM, and the question or definition of a museum. And I was part of the group that worked on the current definition in ICOM Vienna, 2007. And I believe me, to get intangible heritage into the definition was a nightmare, was a challenge, because so many people opposed it. Museums have nothing to do with intangible heritage. And so even to get that one phrase was such a challenge. And then in Kyoto, to have a whole manifesto ended up in a fiasco, as much as I support the manifesto. And I think the world has changed and continues to change even more dramatically. Sorry, Lynn, I'm making sure that I'm watching my clock, so I stick to your 20 minutes. Now, the thing is that in my journey with ICOM, and also as the founding president of the International Research Network on the Inclusive Museum, over the years, and thanks, and now during the pandemic, in the last 3 years, significant, confluence of issues have come up. First and foremost, of course, the pandemic itself. If you look at a country like India, sort of the informal sector, which is quite substantial around museums and heritage sites, was severely affected. So much unemployment, right from the elderly woman who would be selling peanuts, outside the museum, to all the people, who relied on the museums. And this is not unique to India; it's unique to, it's the characteristic elsewhere too. And of course, a lot of people lost jobs. And the irony of it in the United States, where the definition of a museum is largely driven by its educational role, a lot of museum educators lost their job, all the major museums in New York. But the fact that the pandemic made people feel that education is optional, could be, disbanded educators, is also reflected in the Kyoto debate when the manifesto was introduced. ICOM Sika objected very strongly because education was excluded from that manifesto. So the education value, when we talk about the power of museums, which is the theme, and if you want to decolonize the museum from object-centeredness to a holistic approach where we put the communities at the center, we must acknowledge the centrality of education and the intergenerational transmission and the role of museums in that transmission, and being responsive, reflective, revealing, and confronting of contemporary issues, and being responsible. So the pandemic has opened up many issues, but it's also opened up the gates for the conservative establishment museums, which have the money to reestablish themselves by stealth or by, whatever. The so-called universal museums, which are the neo-colonial museums, have reasserted themselves during the pandemic because they are some of the richest museums in the world. And so much that we worked on decolonization before the pandemic has been set back. And also the other thing is that I worked with ICOM chairing a group for 6 years to for the prevention of illicit traffic in cultural property. And during the pandemic, substantial increase has been noticed on illicit traffic in cultural property, especially from countries which have low levels of staffing for security, including India and other countries. So that's another characteristic, sort of museums with the documentation and provenance research, documentation, adequate security could have prevented, like the rich museums do, in the West especially. So like this, a number of issues have been raised. The whole question of employment, who retained their jobs, who lost their jobs is a major issue. In countries like in India, where a substantial number of people are employed in government museums, jobs have been, have been, you shouldn't put the clock on because it's very distracting, Lina. And it's very, suddenly I got distracted and I'm losing the flow. It's not a good thing, but so.
Sorry, Dr. Abreshwar. This is actually the timing.
The thing is, distracting things should not be allowed in webinars and seminars.
Sure.
And so the thing is that one could go on about the range of challenges, and but also the most importantly, climate crisis. I don't use the word climate change anymore because I think we're at the tipping point. It is climate crisis, and ICOM must learn to say climate crisis, not climate change, the soft, wording. And right from Ecuador, with the Galapagos, that Ecuador's World Heritage Site that it's responsible for, to India, Pakistan, all the countries, it's a global reality. Ice caps might be melting as they are, but it's having direct impact on 2 countries in the Pacific, Kiribati and Tuvalu, almost going underwater. So the whole world is in it. There's no more global north and global south. The Sustainable Development Goals were drafted so that it was not just about global south, because remember, Millennium Development Goals were very much about global south, and where the global north played a slightly paternalistic role in trying to rescue global south, and a lot of parachute consultants from global north landed in global south, and a lot of millions and billions of dollars just disappeared. So when we were working on Sustainable Development Goals following the Rio review in 2012 for 2015, the SDGs, we were very conscious of, that as for climate change, that it takes the whole world to deal with poverty alleviation. So these aspects, climate change, climate crisis. And lastly, and I want to mention Black Lives Matter, that those people in the world who think Black Lives Matter is about United States alone, although it's not. And I think that Black Lives Matter is an ideological movement that, I myself held a webinar attended by people from 127 countries on Dalit Lives Matter. Dalits are in India, the highly marginalized communities. And so Black Lives Matter is an ideological movement that is relevant to all of us. So the power of museums, in short, is first thing is not to have cultural amnesia, but to remember. And that's why I started off by recalling things. It's also to ensure equity of employment. It's also to ensure that the momentum of decolonization, the momentum of prevention of illicit traffic, the momentum of repatriation return is reinvigorated, which during the pandemic has been. The power of museums is very much about playing an active role as catalysts to minimize climate crisis as much as possible, have huge educational value. So ICOM definition must center education value, if for nothing else, at least to deal with climate crisis and inequities. I mean, in a country like India, where 73% of the population lives in non-urban areas, the majority of museums are in the cities. Substantial number of people employed in museums are middle class or upper middle class in the cities. What about Mahatma Gandhi's village India and his dream? About village India being the heart and soul for the sense of place and identity of Indians. So where are the museums? And I'm not saying it's India alone. Having lived in Denmark, I can say that the closure of regional small museums in Denmark was shocking, and integrating the collections into the national museums. The local museums in Denmark, which actually were the signatures of local identities, when they were closed and the collections were centralized, a whole lot of memory was erased in Denmark. So it's not just about us in Global South, it's the whole world has to deal with, the impact of the pandemic in the way we're going backwards. How can we reinvigorate the kind of decolonizing processes? How can we, keep on exploring? How can the institution of the museum become inclusive? If you look at onmuseums.com, we don't define what is inclusion, because defining is containing. It's an open-ended dialogue. So the simple motto that we have is, how can the institution of the museum become inclusive? So, and with climate crisis, we can raise awareness, we can do research, we can have a huge educational value. But when it comes to Black Lives Matter, intercultural dialogue, and promoting and showcasing and recognizing and honoring. And I'm glad that Dr. Gayatri Mathur will be speaking about Indigenous people of India, who are very often forgotten. And during the pandemic, Indigenous peoples' communities were devastated across the world, including the United States. And because they didn't have access to the vaccinations, to the preventive measures. So I think that we have to, I'm throwing these issues because I know all of you have so much experience and knowledge. You're from different parts of the world. You know much better than I do, about a lot of these issues. But I'm throwing these issues saying that, we need to get out of our ivory towers. We need to get our fingers in the dirt. We need to confront, our realities, and we need to make the institution of the museum relevant. To become relevant, it has to be reflexive, revealing, and confronting of its past practices. I wish you all the best. Thanks, Meena. Am I on time, Meena?
Yes, Dr. Amreshwar. Actually,
I still have 3 more minutes, but I'm not going to take them up. I'll hand over extra 3 minutes to you. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
everyone.
much. Javed sir, are you with us?